Well, 50 years of the Assad family dictatorship came to an end yesterday in Syria. President Biden made this statement at 1:39 p.m.
At long last, the Assad regime has fallen. This regime brutalized and tortured and killed literally hundreds of thousands of innocent Syrians. The fall of the regime is a fundamental act of justice. It's a moment of historic opportunity for the long-suffering people of Syria to build a better future for their proud country.
President Biden made the point that Assad's support from Russia collapsed under the pressure of the war Vladimir Putin decided to start in Ukraine.
Russia's support for Assad also failed. And that's because Ukraine, backed by our American allies, has put up a wall of resistance against the invading Russian forces, inflicting massive damage on the Russian forces. And that has left Russia unable to protect its main ally in the Middle East.
President Biden describes his administration's policy on Syria, which has now ended with the collapse of the Assad regime yesterday.
We maintained our military presence in Syria, our counter-ISIS, to counter the support of local partners as well on the ground, their partners, never ceding an inch of territory, taking out leaders of ISIS, ensuring that ISIS can never establish a safe haven there again.
And it will not be up to Donald Trump to ensure that ISIS can never establish a safe haven there again. But Donald Trump has not suggested that he has any idea how to do that. He did post on social media, Assad is gone. He has fled his country. His protector, Russia, led by Vladimir Putin, was not interested in protecting him any longer. Vladimir Putin is reportedly protecting Bashar al-Assad, who is now residing in Moscow, having successfully fled to Moscow yesterday. In Syria, no one is sure what will happen next. Here's Richard Engel in Damascus.
And that has been the kind of scene that we've been seeing all morning here, where people have come to Damascus from all over the country to sing songs, to take photographs of this moment. There was a drone in the air a moment ago trying to get some high shots, and lots of celebratory gunfire. These are civilians. People are coming out. You can hear some women here ululating, which is a very typical way of cheering and celebrating. And there are also fighters here. Some of the rebels have made appearances, and they are being greeted like heroes as people come out, embrace them, thank them for the fight. This has just been a stunning last couple of weeks in this country.
Donald Trump's choice for Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, has spoken favorably about Assad in the past, saying, quote, Assad is not the enemy of the United States, end quote. She has admitted to secretly traveling to meet with Assad at a time when all travel in and out of Syria was controlled by Assad. If her nomination makes it all the way to a confirmation hearing, Tulsi Gabbard will be asked about every word she said to Assad and what he said to her. And while she's testifying, the former dictator of Syria will be sitting in Moscow watching her confirmation hearing and knowing if she tells any lies under oath about her communications with him. Assad will, of course, tell his landlord now, Vladimir Putin, that Tulsi Gabbard has compromised herself, and then Vladimir Putin will own her future. We have the possibility of Donald Trump empowering a director of national intelligence who can be blackmailed by deposed dictator Bashar al-Assad and Vladimir Putin. No president other than Donald Trump would ever nominate as unqualified and reckless a person as Tulsi Gabbard for any position in government. So, too, with Donald Trump's nomination of Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense, we can only wonder what Pete Hegseth was doing over the weekend when the regime in Syria was collapsing. He has promised to stop drinking only if he is confirmed as Secretary of Defense. That means, according to his former co-workers at Fox, when he was hosting a weekend morning show, it is possible that Pete Hegseth was drunk all weekend this weekend, as he reportedly has been in the past while working at Fox. It is extremely likely that President Biden had private conversations, possibly several this weekend, with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin as the situation was rapidly unfolding in Syria. That's the kind of job defense secretary is. The urgent situations and the urgent calls can happen at any moment of the day or night, including the weekends. If Pete Hegseth doesn't have a drinking problem, there is still no reason to think that he could handle any aspect of the job of defense secretary at any level of sobriety. Donald Trump apparently believes he can somehow avoid the embarrassment of the possible collapse of Pete Hegseth's nomination by simply making no effort to get him confirmed.
Have you gotten assurances from senators that he's going to be confirmed?
No.
That interview also included these gems from Donald Trump. Quote, "I consider myself to be the father of IVF. And I'm sort of proud of my decision. At the same time, sometimes I regret it. And I know more about judges than any human being in history." That interview also included Donald Trump repeatedly telling the lie that the January 6th committee deleted all of the evidence that they collected in their investigation, and that members of the committee should go to jail. Donald Trump then added that he would not tell his attorney general to prosecute Liz Cheney or any other members of the January 6th committee. He also said that he would not tell his attorney general to prosecute Joe Biden, even though Donald Trump made an explicit in writing campaign promise to appoint a special prosecutor to investigate Joe Biden. Donald Trump was asked about his nominee for Secretary of Defense being the first presidential nominee in history to promise not to drink if he gets the job.
He'll stop drinking if he gets this job.
Yeah.
Does that worry you?
No, I think that everybody has something that they can stop. Some people can stop eating. I'm lucky I'm not a drinker, but I could stop eating.
If you stop eating, as hunger strikers around the world have proven, you will be dead in a matter of months. If you stop drinking alcohol, you might just live a lot longer. Donald Trump doesn't seem to know the difference between stopping eating and stopping drinking alcohol. And an answer like that would get any previous president condemned as being too old or just too out of it and confused to handle the job of president. But Donald Trump's rank and unyielding stupidity on every subject raised in that interview is something the Washington news media does not seem particularly animated by. In the same way, they have been animated, to put it mildly, every time Joe Biden stutters or stumbles in the middle of a sentence or uses the wrong word, when what Joe Biden is actually saying is both true and important. If Joe Biden said any of the things Donald Trump said in that interview yesterday, the national news media would have declared him utterly lost. As of tonight, Pete Hegseth does not have the votes to win confirmation in the Senate Armed Services Committee. 3 Republican members of that committee have made it clear they are not now voting yes on the Hegseth nomination, and it takes only 1 Republican vote to kill that nomination in the committee. That includes the 2 Republican women on the committee, Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa and Senator Deb Fischer of Nebraska, and it also includes Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota.
What do you make of Pete Hegseth as President-elect Trump's pick for defense secretary? Have you decided where you are on that?
I had a great meeting with Pete. I told him that I really thought there was a path forward for him to be confirmed. But I think the challenge for Pete is going to be responding in public to some of the allegations that have been made.
Does he have your support?
We'll find out after he comes back and he answers those questions in public.
We'll find out. It only takes 1 Republican senator in the Armed Services Committee to vote against Pete Hegseth to defeat the nomination in the committee. It is still technically possible to bring that nomination to the Senate floor for a vote of the full Senate, but usually a nomination defeated in the committee dies in the committee. Here's what Senator Deb Fischer said about Pete Hegseth's nomination.
Are you ready to say where you're going to fall on that vote quite yet?
You know, we'll see how the hearing goes. But as I said, we had a great conversation.
We'll see how the hearing goes. Everyone knows how the hearing is going to go. Everyone knows the hearing is going to be a disaster. Every Republican senator knows if Pete Hegseth makes it to a Senate confirmation hearing, there will be endless testimony and questioning about his public drunkenness and his drunkenness at work and the extramarital night of sex that he admitted to in a police investigation that happened in a Monterey, California hotel room, which the woman involved told the Monterey police was rape. No accused rapist has ever had a Senate confirmation hearing. Pete Hegseth is now scheduled to have the first Senate confirmation hearing in history of an accused rapist. And every Republican senator who's saying we'll see how the hearing goes knows exactly how the hearing is going to go. And they know that voting against his nomination will be much, much easier after that hearing. Senator Joni Ernst, who is running for re-election in 2 years, is now being targeted for a possible Republican primary challenge in Iowa if she doesn't support Pete Hegseth. She has now taken to telling reporters, these are her words, quote, "I am supporting him through this process," end quote. She has said that repeatedly now to reporters. And of course, reporters realize that doesn't really tell you how she's going to vote.
Absolutely. It means that we're having really good discussions, and we discussed several items that were really important to me, and I'll just refer back to my statement on those items. But what I appreciated very much about Mr. Hegseth who came in, he really does respect the process, and I'm grateful for that. But again, I'll refer you back to my statement.
Are you confident with denials about those assault allegations? Do you believe those denials?
I'll refer you back to the statement.
Will you have another meeting with him?
That's to be determined, but thank you.
You talked about the audit in your statement. What does that mean? Can you provide more details?
Yes, and we talked through a number of issues that the Pentagon has right now, and it was a very thoughtful and deep conversation about several items that I'd already talked to him about, and it was good to have a real thorough policy discussion.
Did the pressure of getting back home and primary politics play into this?
We have been talking these same issues every meeting that we've had, and he had really thoughtful answers. So thank you. Thanks, guys.
No matter how many times they asked, she repeatedly refused to say that she's going to vote for Pete Hegseth's nomination.